Well, hello everybody,
Hello.
Hi.
Hey, I'm Mario.
and we are Mind Ramen Games. If you did not know, we just published our game Banana Hammock on Kickstarter, which was funded at the end of last year on Kickstarter.
All right, it was our first published game, but it isn't the first time that we've been interested in game design. Both of us have had interest in making games, going back years. I remember when I was little, I played a lot of video games, and I used to think that I was going to be a game designer when I grew up. So I would draw Mega Man style stages and keep everything in a little folder. And I had this crazy idea that if I mailed this folder to Nintendo, they would mail me back a video game. Obviously, I know better now, but this is going back to like 5 or 6. I've been interested in this stuff. Fast forward a little bit and kind of grew out of wanting to be a game designer, but fell in love with tabletop games. One of the games that I used to play a lot and really brought me into the fold of like modern tabletop games was the Resident Evil deck building game. And I love Resident Evil, loved that card game, but there was a lot that I thought the developers could have capitalized on or didn't include in the game, so I started making expansions for it. Then made expansions for another game called Pixel Glory. It's another deck builder. And after a while, I realized I'm putting hours and hours of time and effort into making games that I don't own. So I realized I wanted to start making tabletop games for myself.
So just like Mario here, I've been, enamored with games from a very young age. Probably 5 or 6 years old, or however old you are when you go to elementary school. We're on the bus, and my friend had this piece of paper with like a maze drawn out, and there was traps and goblins and treasure, and I just, every time I got on the bus, I was so excited. Not about school, obviously, but about the maze, every single time. And then somewhere after the 3rd or 4th time, I fell into a pit and died. I was like, you know what, I want to make my own. So I started to draw my own maze maps and everything, and then I started to get really into like the Sega Genesis, play a lot of Shining Force, a lot of very strategy-heavy games, and I just fell in love and wanted to make video games. Fast forward to probably about 5 to 7 years ago, the tools that you can access now, either for free or for very inexpensive to be able to make games, they're so accessible now. Whereas when I was growing up, it costs hundreds of dollars, you need some actual schooling for it. And nowadays there's YouTube tutorials and free downloads for you to just get started. So I created a game called Earth Muncher, released it on Steam a few years ago. And then after that, my creative itch was not satisfied. So I made a faction expansion based on Dragon Ball Z for Smash Up. And I threw it on Board Game Geek so people could try it out. So if you're here today, you're either our awesome friends who decided to show up, or you are also interested in game design. So we're going to take you through the process to bring your game from inception to publishing.
And when Mark says Inception, he's not talking about Christopher Nolan's 2010 masterpiece, Inception. He's talking about just creating an idea in the first place. Ideas can come from many different places, like sparks of imagination, brainstorming sessions, or even as homages to things that we already like and know.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that top is still spinning somewhere.
Are you sure?
We may all be in a dream. I don't know. I really don't know. But for example, depending on how old some of you are, things such as playing Old Maid versus then playing newer games like Go Fish, essentially they're almost the same game. They're just basically a different theme with slightly different mechanics, but it really shows you how you can take a deck of playing cards and create something awesome for all ages.
Yeah, and like I said, ideas can come from anywhere, but there's no rhyme or reason for what the idea is. Sometimes you get an idea for a name that you really like. Sometimes you get an idea for a theme for a game. Sometimes for a mechanic that you might want to put in. And then, regardless of where you start, then you end up taking that and kind of seeing that idea through and figuring out how it fits together into a game.
And really, inspiration can come from anywhere at any time. For example, Banana Hammock came to me while I was watching Scrubs. I was watching the My Personal Jesus episode, and JD got so flummoxed and awkward. He's like, "Banana Hammock," just to kind of distract people from the situation. I'm like, "Banana Hammock, that should be a game!" And I ran over, I paused Scrubs, ran to the computer, just start typing up. There's got to be monkeys. They got to slip on banana peels. They got to try to get as many bananas as possible. And there has to be a hammock where you can keep your bananas safe. And I just kind of, it organically flowed out, and just after that fantastic, game name, everything else just kind of flowed out.
No, I'm pretty mechanically focused. When I make games, I focus on the gameplay and the mechanics. So it makes sense that that's usually the idea that comes to me. I'll get an idea for how I want a game to play, and then like how Mark started with a name and then tried to see what would fit with that name and what would organically make sense when he was building the world and the gameplay. I start with the gameplay and then try to figure out what would be fun gameplay, what could this work with, and then what would this look like for players.
And a snappy name or a unique theme may catch somebody's attention, Banana Hammock, for example. But what keeps people's attention is engaging gameplay or something that really brings them in, and there's a lot of enjoyment. So when you're first designing the gameplay, you're really designing the experience for the players. So ask yourself, what kind of experience you want your players to have. Don't be afraid to analyze, other games you've played, and see what they do and don't do well. Think about what interests you when you play those other games.
Yeah, think about the goal of what you want the game to be, almost like a mission statement, telling yourself throughout the creative process, what kind of experience do you want to bring to them? Do you want to base your game on something cooperative, something competitive, strategy-based, or luck-based? And that way you can reference back to that throughout that whole process to make sure that you're creating the experience that you had envisioned when you were first coming up with it.
So, for example, with Banana Hammock, like I said, the core mechanic was the hammock, and then of course, I thought about how people are going to win. Like, why would you be playing? And that is getting those bananas, because obviously you are monkeys. And then even things like counterplay that slowly got added in. But really, one of the most critical pieces is playtesting, and it's something that is really overlooked by a lot of developers. And this is how you really curate the experience for your players. You see what works, what doesn't work, how the gameplay flows. You see how the various elements interact with one another. And I mean, whether intentional or not, some of the best things can happen organically in those playtesting sessions. When I created the first version of Banana Hammock, I mean, I printed out just sheets of paper with things like greedy monkey, science monkey, thief monkey, grumpy gorilla, and it was just words on cards, and then had a cheat sheet that what everything did, because I didn't know how many times I was going to make these cards. So I cut them all up, I put them into card sleeves with a blank playing card, because I bought those. So I'm like, but I didn't want to, actually write on them yet, because who knows if those names are going to stay. So I had 2 stacks of like 100 cards, and we had to have some fun with those before we really refined it down.
Yeah, and a big part of the playtesting process is identifying parts of the game, whether that's gameplay, whether that is the theme, the art, the layout, whatever, the things that you want to make adjustments to. But like Mark was saying, when we first started playtesting this, he had this gallon Ziploc bag filled with 200 cards. They just had names on them. I'm sorry, Mark, it was a mess.
It was a mess.
So this game was definitely a mess when it first started. We were in this independent game group over at Ringling School of Art and Design. So we would go to these meetings where we would discuss games and ideas with other independent developers, and we would show stuff off. So people would show physical games, they would show off like tech demos. Well, we go there and we've got this gallon-sized Ziploc bag filled with card names in sleeves. And I remember having this feeling, like, Mark, we can't show them this. this is not going to work. We need to take this back. Give me a week, and then we'll show up to the next one, and we'll show it there. So I took that and really analyzed the feedback that we got from our early play testing, what the mission was for the gameplay, what Mark's vision was for it when he first came up with the idea, and then I redid a lot of the game, made a lot of adjustments to the gameplay to make it flow a little bit better. So the game flowed, it went from 200 cards down to 90, and it was a lot more cohesive of an experience. Like there wasn't stuff in the game that really broke up the gameplay. So once people know how to play, it's just very fast paced. But the other thing that I did during that was to create a template for the art and even put art onto the cards. Now it was all MS Paint art at the time, but then when I showed it to Mark, now we had a template that more or less stuck to what the final cards would look like. It just didn't have final art.
And I mean, there's something to be said about having something actually printed out, even with MS Paint in all its glory. I mean, if any of you've played, there's the card called Rats, and originally it was just a grumpy chimp with a cigarette and a business suit. He was just so mad at whatever was happening. So even though we obviously didn't use any MS Paint final product, clearly, it really actually gave some inspiration to some of the art for those cards. And at that point, when you have that template, even if you have MS Paint, it becomes real at that point. It becomes an actual thing you can get your hands on that, I mean, instead of being just some goofy idea that I was like, oh, let's make a Banana Hammock game because Scrubs told me to, it becomes, something that could possibly be a product on shelves one day.
So I do all my stuff in Photoshop. So with that early design, I had designed it in Photoshop. I had exported them as PDFs. I had laid them out in a template to print the sheet and then cut them with a paper cutter at my house, sleeved them. There are actual services that do this kind of stuff though. So we didn't really know about these at the time, but two great services that we eventually used throughout the production cycle of Banana Hammock was Drive-Thru Games and the Game Crafter. So both excellent services for anybody that wants to make a game, because you can create something, whether it's a playtest deck or a prototype of a game. They don't just do cards, but those were awesome because you could print in smaller scale. You could print 1 or 2 decks and not like a commercial printer where you're printing hundreds.
And there's something to also be said again about the various types of playtesting. After you have your prototype product or copy, playtesting is incredibly important, both internal, external, and blind playtesting. So something that new developers really overlook is blind playtesting. That's like we send our copy to somebody and say, play our game, and then we get feedback. It's not like we're at an event like we would be now showing people how to play the game, because guess what, Mario, you're not going to be in that person's home when they buy that game. You're not going to pop out of the box and be able to show them how to play.
Well, fine, I won't, Mark.
Please don't. Yeah. Yes, you do. It's the Mario appearance fee. So, and even if you're there to instruct them, most of the time it's going to be played wrong. I mean, that's just how it goes with games, and that's where it's really important to have those very clear, concise rule sheets to go with your game, so people can jump in without needing explanations or clarification. They just can refer to it while they're playing. And it's easy to think that everything's clear and concise because you're so close to the project that to you it's obvious. Like clearly when it says eat on the card, the monkey's gonna eat the banana. But we found that some of the reviewers thought it was the player's little player card that was eating the banana, which mechanically doesn't make any difference, but thematically it does. So in reality, it was the cards themselves that were being played were eating the cards because you'd get a banana peel in exchange, or some other event would happen.
Yeah, and that was definitely a challenge that we had, because most of the playtesting we did was internal or external, but we were always there. So we did internal playtesting with us and our friends. We did external playtesting at events like this. So we've done other conventions. We've set up events at like local game stores. at bars where we could have people come out and try the game. But the things that those have in common is that we were always there to teach them how to play. While the instructions were there, we were guiding people through it. And it wasn't until we started to ship games off to reviewers that we were really getting a lot of blind playtesting feedback. So these people were more or less learning by reading the instructions. And there were things, while none of them were major, but there were things that were confusing enough to somebody who has never seen the game before that they needed to seek out clarification, and that shouldn't be the case. We were fortunate enough that everything was minor, and then we took that feedback and changed it, but that's definitely a pitfall that people can run into if they don't do this early enough in the design process. Imagine getting through to when you're ready to actually publish the game and finding out that nobody can actually decipher what your rule sheet means. So that would be a big problem and something you'd have to go back and redesign, either how something works or how something looks.
So one of the things we had, to anybody who even plays games casually, there are terms like draw, reveal, take, steal, trade. They all work differently, and they can work differently in different games. So it's not even something that is a world, everyone knows that draw means this, it always means this. So those are things we just took for granted. Like, obviously it's draw, it's not gonna be the same as revealing a card. But again, it's those small nuances that really make a difference in your rules. And it's easy to feel like you're alone on an island, especially in these times when you're trying to develop something, but there is a great community of developers out there. There are various communities you can be a part of, many of which are free. We got involved with the Indie Game Alliance, and they provide some really great services. Like they'll take your game to a con and actually demo copies or sell copies for you as a part of their services. You have access to people that will blind playtest your game and actually give you written out feedback. So these are things that can just really help when you're wanting to create something.
Yeah, and those are very good points. Having learned some of the lessons that we did earlier on, we probably could have utilized more technology as well. This happened when we were putting out the Kickstarter, but we wanted a way for people to actually see the game, and we ended up loading the game into Tabletopia. People can still play it today for free. Actually, every month we'll look and see how many unique signatures we get. People are still signing in and playing the game, and I just think that's awesome. The game hasn't actually even shipped yet, and people are going in there and playing, and it's not our friends. They're people from wherever that got the link on our Kickstarter. So very, very cool. But that would have been something, if we could go back and with future projects, that we would probably initiate earlier, so we could get either feedback or get more exposure outside of our local area.
And even with the Tabletopia version and the various misunderstandings in the review copy, if we had blind playtested sooner, that's something we could have avoided, those extra revisions that may have pushed us off a bit. But we were very fortunate that they were minor. It can be enough for some developers to just stop them in their tracks and their project dies. Imagine having to get all the art redone for a game. It can cost $5,000, $10,000, $20,000 depending on how much art you have. So that kind of thing can just absolutely sink a project before it even gets off the ground.
Now, throughout this, we've talked a lot about the creative parts of the game, but there's something to be said for sure about what comes after that. We were very gung-ho at the beginning of this, and I think anybody who's ever been interested in making games starts off that project thinking that it's fun. You want to create something, you want to create that gameplay, you want to create the art, you want to bring out this masterpiece that you're going to show everybody and be excited about. But what happens after you make the game and start doing playtesting and you get feedback? Well, all of the logistics and everything else that goes into it is what happens. And we quickly found out that we had no idea what we were supposed to do after the game was created. So we had the game, we had done play testing, but there were all sorts of things that had to go into this, and not just creating a company. So we had to create a company. We had to research between trademarks and copyrights. At one point we even consulted a copyright lawyer because we needed to know what the right thing was for the product that we were bringing out in the sector that it's going into. So a lot of stuff that people kind of take for granted if it's not something that they've had to do, and even sillier things like if this game was entirely sold online, you still have to register a UPC for it to be sold, even if it's never going to be scanned. So just very interesting steps that we didn't know anything about when we first started.
It's like a national online database. I mean, if you scanned it at a retail store, it'll come up.
Yeah.
Even though we're besides like Ascension the Game and a few other places that are here local, you know what I mean, it would still, if the store had that access to the UPC database, it would ring up. And honestly, like Mario said, everything's fun in games when you're making the game, but there's a lot of things that go into it that it's basically called dark work. And those of you who are familiar with how to develop film back in the day, all this newfangled technology, but it was an actual room that was very dark with just a red light. You're in there with chemicals, and you're just, after you've taken all the really fun, awesome photos, you're dunking them in, you're hanging them up. I mean, it's just menial, boring work. And that's really what it comes down to, is that besides the real fun stuff, establishing some kind of legal entity like an LLC or S Corp, and why you want to do certain ways, or the fact that as soon as you print this, it actually has a loose copyright or trademark on it because it exists as a physical product. You can say, I made these copies in 2018. So if somebody prints something called Banana Hammock in 2021, that's not us, then say, hey, this existed before. There's not as much legal ground on that versus having an actual paid for, registered with the government, which will have some international repercussions as well. But those little nuances you would just not know until you really got involved in the process. So we found it very helpful to create like a roadmap. So I had this roadmap document, like V5 at that point, that had it broke down by like the pre-Kickstarter, the Kickstarter, the post-Kickstarter, and then development on the future projects, and splitting up when we're going to do the company versus when we're going to get the trademark, when we're going to prototype build, when we're going to do testing, how soon before the Kickstarter are we going to start advertising, when does the Kickstarter page have to be done before launch? 2 months beforehand, not the week before like we did, because you need to have those followers on Kickstarter itself. It's not just a social media following, but if you want to be able to get off the ground real quick and fund that first day or those first hours, you need a very large following on Kickstarter itself.
So for us, obviously we went the route of Kickstarter, so we crowdfunded it on Kickstarter. That's not the only available way for people to bring a game out and publish it. Some people go directly through a publisher where they get a contract with a company, and that company could handle the printing and distribution. In some cases, publishers also control the artwork and the overall design of the game. So people that go through a publisher may or may not maintain full creative control of the product. So it's very interesting. I know for us, one of the decisions to self-publish was mostly in the cost, because when you go through a publisher, typically your contract, typically the contract that you have, let's just take it down.
Let's take it down. It's okay, Kate, you did a good job.
Is the contract that you have would usually only pay you in a percentage of what the profits are. So if you have a contract as a small developer to get 2% of the profits, well, if your profits are only a few dollars and you're getting 2% of that, you're likely to never see your return unless your game sells millions of copies, or if your publisher can get it into stores like Walmart and Target.
And only like really established designers and developers can get more. Like it ranges from 6% to 12%, and that could be on gross sales, international or not, or if they localize it in a different language. I mean, there's so many different things. Some people just enjoy creating content. You wouldn't even do the art, you would just do the mechanics and the gameplay, and you'd give that to the publisher. They would skin it, they would write the instruction manual in a more professional format. They'd handle everything else. Some people just pump out games like that, and they're happy with their royalty check they get every month from their various projects. But like Mario said, we wanted to go with self-publishing because then we control the IP, right? The intellectual property, where, you know, down the line, it's not going to have like Banana Hammock 18 plus, Banana Hammock for kids, Banana Hammock the tavern game, like all these things that maybe we don't want the IP to go down those roads, or even just changing the art style. We had a comic book artist here in Sarasota, Salvador Raga, do it for us, and we wouldn't have it any other way. But if we went with a different, like a publisher rather than doing it ourselves, we may not have had this unique look that we have now.
Yeah. So outside of all those things, one of the biggest takeaways that we had was kind of just how important social media actually was to the entire process. I know that what we had planned for in our roadmap was sort of everything we needed to do along the way that we knew of. You know, we kept inserting things into the roadmap because we'd find out about them throughout the process. And while we had an initial plan for social media and marketing, you know, I can't stress enough how important it is to do that. And I know if we could go back 3 years ago, we would have a much greater social media presence from the very beginning, just to further increase our chances, our audience, our exposure, you know, and ultimately helping to ensure that our game and future games are a success. So I know the game did end up getting funded, but for anybody that is interested in that process, take that lesson away from, you know, what we learned throughout the last 3 years, and really start with that and build that up as early as possible.
Yeah, that was, like Mario said, it's the bane of our existence is social media, and just being current on there. It's so much, especially in the current climate. I mean, where for a while conventions and everything stopped, it just really hinders how you're going to build your audience. And again, having that roadmap is just, it's so important. It really keeps you on task, especially when you're hitting that dark work that isn't fun. You got to keep your eye on the prize. And we actually, if any of you are interested, you can comment on our post about this talk today, and we can send you a copy of the roadmap we have, just so you can kind of see where we're at what time, what we were doing, you know, everything down from we needed to go to the Herald Tribune office to drop off a check for our DBA, because it's Mind Ramen LLC, but we're Mind Ramen Games. So small things like that you would never ever think of, we have that all in our roadmap. So I know that we talked about a lot of different topics today, and we did talk about them pretty quickly. I mean, a lot of them could have their own day-long workshop. They can go into so much detail. So we did learn a lot in the past 2.5, 3 years of development for Banana Hammock, which, funny enough, the game itself, maybe 3 to 6 months of actual work. Everything else was company, building an audience, going to events. I mean, so again, that roadmap, learn from what we've done through our trials and tribulations, and you'll be set up for success.
Yep. So that's what we wanted to share with you. We wanted to impart the lessons that we learned through going through everything the last couple years. So any budding designers, you can start off on a better foot than we did, and hopefully bring whatever your idea is to fruition. So, do you guys have any questions for us? Yes.
What was the first step that you had to take?
Well, Mark came up with the idea for Banana Hammock specifically, but before we had decided on Banana Hammock, we had brainstorming sessions where we were pitching different ideas. I remember we had this whiteboard where we were just writing ideas, like we'd spit something out, write it. Sometimes there was more to the idea than a name, sometimes it was just a name, and like I was saying earlier, sometimes it was a mechanic. And that was what we went with, and then we kind of boiled that down to a few different projects we wanted to work on, and then ultimately decided out of that short list to go with Banana Hammock.
Like there's things that, depending on the game you play, I mean, if you like worker placement games like Stone Age, or play things that are more party themed like Exploding Kittens, or things that are based on social deduction like Secret Hitler or Coup, there could be a core mechanic of I want this to be this way, and then you build a game around it, or you start with the name and you build everything around that.
Right. Thank you. Thank you for asking that. Yes.
You said it took about 3 years for the development as through this?
The entire process of creating the company, I mean, we really got delayed by about 8 months by
Yeah,
COVID.
Yeah,
at
COVID
least.
was a big
So,
monkey wrench in
yeah.
our plans.
Uh-huh.
I had to, but it really was. You know, our roadmap for last year, we were going to do our Kickstarter much sooner. Our Kickstarter
Like
was
a
going
year sooner.
Yeah, our Kickstarter was going to be probably about this time last year, maybe July, if not June, and it ended up ending in December because of how delayed things were. So we were at the part in our process where we were gonna do events like every other weekend, every month, and expand as much as possible, and stores shut down and people didn't wanna go out. So that became a big hurdle that we had to overcome, and eventually we had to just decide it was time to go and do it. But like Mark said earlier, the game itself was definitely playable within the first 3 to 6 months, you know, in almost its final form now. I've made little revisions, or we made little revisions after getting additional feedback, but it more or less looked like the finished product right now, 6 months or so after we had started. But then there was a lot left that we didn't know about, that we had to figure out. Had COVID not happened, you know, it probably would have been closer to a 2-year design cycle, and most of that time was just because we didn't know about stuff. So future games, and I think probably a more realistic cycle, is probably like taking a year from beginning to end.
And really, it was 3 to 6 months of one weekend, like one day on a weekend
Yeah.
for like 4 or 5 hours, not 8 hours a day, you know, 5 days a week for 3 to
Working
6 months.
full time on the project.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So if you
yeah.
went full time on a project and it was something that was smaller, like Banana Hammock, even with all the nuances, the play testing, if you really condensed it down, a couple months, really.
Gotcha.
It's all the other dark work, the stuff that isn't fun, that takes forever, which is why a lot of people go that route of, I'll just take 10% here. You know, I want a down payment of X thousand dollars. Do whatever you want with it, and then you move on to their next project.
10% is rather generous.
It's
I
very
don't-
generous.
I
I
know
mean,
that we would, a normal contract's probably like 3 to 5%.
Yeah, yeah. I just like to dream big.
Yeah.
You know, I'm Isaac Childs, or you know, from Gloomhaven, or Jamie Stonemeyer, Stonemeyer Games, or
Optimist?
yeah, very very optimistic.
All right, thank you.
Yeah,
Good
thank
question.
At what point did you start with Kickstarter, and how was it getting set up with them and working with them or through them?
Do you mean like when did we actually start planning the Kickstarter campaign, or when did we decide we were going to use Kickstarter?
Both.
Okay, I think pretty early on we had decided we were going to go crowdfunding, and that's just a pretty common theme these days, especially in this industry. A lot of tabletop developers go with crowdfunding, but that's not to say that that going through a traditional publisher is bad. That's just what we went with because it's a bit easier to get off the ground, and like we said earlier, we have more control over it. We had also entertained the idea of going with a publisher, but ultimately ended up sticking with wanting to crowdfund it. So early on in the development, that was our goal, was to get it there. We had a more or less, we had a plan for the Kickstarter based on other people's Kickstarters, not to like pull ideas necessarily from theirs, but to look at successful Kickstarters and see the layout for theirs, what kind of stuff they used and what sections you should have, what things make the most sense. So after analyzing a bunch of them, we put together a plan, and like any good plan, part of it goes out the window when it's actually time to do the stuff. So when it came down to the last months before it, we were discussing it, we were adjusting things, and when it came down to 2 weeks before the Kickstarter was when we really finalized all the art. So learn from us. If you do this much sooner, because we were rushing through those last couple weeks to get all the art put together and get it put up on the site. But I would say it probably took a week to get all of the sections done, everything written, all the art finished for the site, and everything loaded, so we were ready before the start date.
and I'm a Kickstarter addict. So I mean, I'm a super backer on there. I've been backing stuff for years. Spent way too much money on there. I can't tell you how many videos I watched on there and how we got our ideas for our little skit in ours, and like you said, all the different sections, backing all the other backers to also, besides the fact that I maybe wanted throw burrito with the actual burritos and stuff, or Zombicide, or the newest Arcadia Quest, or Frosthaven, or Gloomhaven. Still wanted to have that connection with those other developers, which of course we didn't utilize very well, unfortunately. But like Mario said, when we're wrapping up the Kickstarter, the Indie Game Alliance, we did pay for the membership they have, because you get discounts on manufacturers, and also they have a service where you get a free consultation for your Kickstarter. So he actually got on with us, ran through each section, gave his suggestions on what they thought we should and shouldn't do, and that really helped clinch the very end of our page and its actual image.
Are you guys planning on playing this game today at all, or tomorrow here in EastCon?
Yeah, we have them. We brought copies so we could teach people how to play if anyone's interested.
Yep.
So I don't know if there's a panel in here when we're done,
Yeah.
but if there is, there's also like the game room. But yeah, I would love to teach people how to play.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Well, yeah. At the very least, we can leave a copy here and just ask the Dark Side, who asked us here today.
Descent in the gaming.
Yeah. Descent in the Gaming, thank you. That asked us here today to allow people to play it.
Sure. Yeah.
Did you have any copies for sale today?
Unfortunately, no, just because we don't have the copies for our Kickstarter backers yet.
Correct.
And we wouldn't want to sell them before the backers got their copies.
Will they be at Dark Side?
I have talked to Brian over there. He said he is going to be supporting the project. He loves Salvador's work, so that was an immediate yes. So them and Descent in the Gaming will have it in August.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll also have events that we're going to go to. We've done a few at the Cock and Bull bar on Cattleman, and we'll obviously have copies there for people to purchase when they're interested.
Yeah. Yes.
And will you guys have them to be sold like online?
Yeah. So that's one thing I have to do a lot of research on, is how do we want to do a pre-order system? Do we need to build a site for it? Do we use Weebly? Do we use Shop? Or can you just use PayPal, where it forwards to your PayPal and says $20 for a copy, and you fill it in through that? There's all kinds of different ways to do it, and it's one of those things that I just haven't gotten around to, because there's so much to do. But yes,
right?
there were absolutely, it is dark work, exactly. So we'll absolutely have the ability for people to pre-order or pay, or like just buy it when it comes out.
Yeah, for sure.
And just let me know whenever you guys have those game nights, because I will post it in the singles group.
Okay.
Absolutely.
For sure.
Appreciate it.
Yeah,
Every time.
absolutely. Thank you. All right. Well, cool. If no one, oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
So, I'm not sure if this is an appropriate question, but so how would you say that Ringling College was helpful with learning to, like, was it helpful with getting you this far?
Oh, absolutely. Being able to join any community in general is very helpful, and they were like a collaboration, or just combination of one of those C words. There was video game developers, there were people that wrote for tabletop RPGs, there's people that did board games and card games. It was a great experience. Unfortunately, that group is not as active now, especially when COVID hit. I was able to kind of help admin the group, and we brought it to where I was at the time, the Microsoft store at the mall, where they could actually present on the big screen. But then everything kind of closed down. We didn't have a place to hold the meetings, so we just kind of chatted virtually here and there. But if you can find a local group, or even conventions like this, to start to meet other developers, that's a great way to kind of get along in your journey.
And outside of the original indie game developer group that we were in, one of the coolest events we've done was Anyone's Game, which was at the Ringling School. So sort of like a convention, ran for the weekend, and it was all independent game developers. People would go there and set up tables where they were just teaching people to play. So we had 2 days where we were there for like 9 hours of running people through the game, giving out promos, taking pictures, And some of the services that we talked about earlier, like drive-through games, they had representatives there because the idea was to get people together from the industry and to teach new people like what we're doing today, but then also for people to make business connections. So that event in particular was very useful and helped in making some contacts, and then also seeing what some other people did, gave us a lot of play testing and feedback from people that we didn't know. So it was very cool.
And there was a lot of, like, I'd say, better known, like Zep from Z-Man Games, which he now does stuff for WizKids. I mean, if you played Pandemic, that's him. He was there, and he had a few prototypes for some things that he had in the works. So it was not just the indie developers that were in town, but people flew from all over the place. Omari, who did Rap Gods, was there as well. He had a really successful Kickstarter that year or the year prior, and he was there as well. And they had panels there as well for people to speak.
Yeah.
Awesome, thank you.
No problem. Thank you. All right. Well, if no one else has questions, we really appreciate you all coming in and listening to us talk for however long that was. We've got some sample merchandise up here